Judging down the line, Cody and I take a look at Houston boosting their defensive line depth chart with the signing of Jacob Martin, and is Clowney and Houston reunion likely?
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to a Monday episode of the Locked On Texan podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to our everydayers from the Himalayas who check us out Monday through Friday. We really appreciate you guys, the truest fans of the Locked On Texan podcast, and honestly, the Houston Texans. If you are new to the Locked On Texan podcast, if this is your first time, thank you. Make sure you subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast, along with subscribing on YouTube as well. And we encourage you to comment, like, and share with your family and friends. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And as always, I'm John, some sports guy Hickman, joined by none other than Cody Davis, your credential media member for the Houston Texans, along with writer for Sports Illustrated. So make sure you guys follow Cody on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. He'll post all of his amazing articles covering your Houston Texans. For today's show, we look at the family reunion, something that, if this was last year's offseason, Lovie Smith would probably have that blaster right now, looking at the reunion of Jacob Martin coming back to Houston on a one-year deal. The details of that contract hasn't been disclosed as of yet, and the potential reunion of Jadeveon Clowney returning to Houston, I think that's really more interesting than Jacob Martin coming back. But I don't think, Cody and listeners, I don't think Jacob Martin coming to Houston is a deal that you salivate over. Oh my God, Jacob Martin's back. But I do believe that Jacob Martin does have value. I believe that there is value in bringing in Jacob Martin. Jacob Martin is probably one of the more trustworthy and consistent situational edge rushers in the NFL. For context, John Grenard played in more snaps than Jacob Martin last season in 8 games than in Martin's 13 games. But Martin was the more productive player in terms of being able to get after the quarterback. In the past 4 seasons, Jacob Martin only played in 46% of the defensive snaps, and he played on Houston, Denver, and New York, the New York Jets. And so he's not a guy that's going to play over 50%. He did the 1 year in Houston, his last year in Houston, played in 61% of the defensive snaps, but that defensive front was nowhere near as talented as what we have here in Houston now, or the year prior to when he first got to Houston. For more context on how Jacob Martin, if he were to make this team, could have an impact for the defensive front, it's always important to know where you've been, to understand where you're going, and to know where DeMeco Ryans has been, to understand what he is trying to build. We used to start the show all the time with DeMeco Ryans' quote, "Building a team to win a championship." San Francisco had 9 sacks from players who contributed on less than 50% of the defensive snaps. We compare that to Houston, who only had 4. Now, 4 to 9 may not seem like a big jump, but guys, that is bringing in players that can go out there and contribute during the small things, the small details for the bigger picture. And of course, guys, I got to look at how this will affect the depth chart. Right now, I'm looking at Derek Rivers. I'm looking at Damone Harris. I'm looking at Chase Winovich, who was signed in the offseason as the competition for Jacob Martin on this team. Those are the 3rd, 3rd, and 4th string players on that front 7 for the front 4 guys, that D-line unit, 3 vets, all on 1-year deals. A lot of similarities there. So when I look at the relationship between Nick Caserio and Jacob Martin, the Texans and Jacob Martin, the past here in Houston and Jacob Martin, he was a fan favorite. Remember the Rock Boys when they would do all of that? When I look at all of that, and more so his productivity as a situational pass rusher, I see him beating those other players out of a spot. And he played under Robert Saleh. Robert Saleh, the connection with D'Amico Ryans. I think he had maybe 2 sacks for New York, maybe 1, but I know he had 3 sacks overall last season. He did play for the New York Jets last year before playing for Denver. So, again, this isn't a guy that I'm just like, oh, wow, Jacob Martin's back in Houston. But when I look at who Houston has on the depth chart right now, again, Chase Winovich, who is a player, by the way, I had a lot of opportunity to watch Chase Winovich as he was a New England Patriot. A lot of things has to be right around Chase for him to be successful, just like a lot of NFL players. But who has the higher ceiling out of a Winovich, out of a Rivers, out of a Harris? And who is more familiar with this team? And who may be more familiar with what this team wants to do defensively, seeing as Jacob Martin played under Robert Saleh last season? I'm not mad at the signing. I can't wait to see the details of the contract. I believe Chase Winovich got a 1-year, $2 million deal. So I can see Martin hovering around between maybe $1.8 million. I don't know how much of the guarantees it'll be, Cody, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm okay with Martin coming back. And at the end of the day, this will make for some great competition during OTAs, during training camp, before they have to cut down to that 53-man roster.
I like the signing of Jacob Martin. First and foremost, I like it because it added depth to that defensive line unit. As we all know, that defensive line unit was probably one of the weaker position groups last season. But it also, to me, John, showcases that, one, Coach D'Amico Ryans, General Manager Nick Caserio, and everybody else involved with this signing, they are actually getting guys who are going to play to the strengths of what Coach D'Amico Ryans wants to do. And what is that? Have a swarm defense. And that is also going to play into making sure that your defensive line can go out there and get after the quarterback. And one of Jacob Martin, if not his best on-field attribute, is his ability to get after the quarterback. He's not going to be somebody that you can rely upon every single snap, John, as you just alluded to, but on situational purposes, he is somebody to where if you call on his number, he can make sure that the production does not dip. As a matter of fact, he spent 3 seasons with the Houston Texans and recorded a combined 10.5 sacks, and that is with him just being a situational type of defensive end. And that also includes, of course, in 2021, I think that was his final year in Houston. Yeah, his final year in Houston with Lovie Smith being this team's defensive coordinator. He recorded a career high for snaps. So when you hear that, John, when you hear that, listeners and viewers, that's just another factor into why the Houston Texans defense will not be as bad as it was over the last 2 seasons. I also want to mention this as well. Jacob Martin has always been a solid run defender. According to Pro Football Focus, last year he recorded a run defensive grade of 67-point run. So for a team that gave up an average of 150-something yards over the last 2 seasons, this is another guy who's going to come in and help lower that.
Yeah, and I think ultimately overall, it does give Houston an opportunity to grade the guys at the lower part of the depth chart. And I like that simply because everybody does have a job to do. You know, if we're going to put you in a situation, are you better than the next man that we're also considering putting in that situation? You haven't seen much out of Derek Rivers. I think the real competition in terms of is if there's a player that you look and say, man, okay, now this is who Jacob Martin is really, really battling against. It is Chase Winovich. So a camp, it's going to be interesting to see how these vets are coming in under a new head coach, first-time head coach who's coming from a successful NFL program in the San Fran 49ers and can kind of just stand out and doing the things that they're really good at. Jacob Martin is a guy that ideally you think he's better at getting after the quarterback, and he has been solid against the run. Chase Winovich, for Houston, I'm not sure they know what they're getting out of Chase Winovich, but he is a guy that I think his career high 1 year was maybe 6.5 sacks, maybe 7 sacks. So he's been able to be successful in the league getting after the quarterback. And they want to do that. They want to get after the quarterback. They want to stuff the run. That's the two competition. Derek Rivers and Damone Harris, I think those two guys won't make the roster. No disrespect to those players and those men. But camp comes around, I am really interested to see how does Chase Winovich beat out Jacob Martin. And if he's around when camp starts, how can any of these guys beat out the former number one overall pick in Jadeveon Clowney? Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs. Boy, has the NBA playoffs been fun. Because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. There's no better place to bet on all of the playoff action right now than America's #1 sports book. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets today. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel is the official sportsbook betting partner of the NFL and the NBA.
Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners. Listen, we got to have a discussion. What is going on with all these former players wanting to come back to the city of Houston for a reunion? Let's just get it out the way now.
They're not bad no more. They Bill O'Brien out there no more.
No. Stay where you at. Stay where you at. Because in
sound like Ja Morant.
Stay
on that side.
Well, hopefully that's all I get from Ja Morant, but let's just say that. But Jacob Martin came back, already got the reunion started. If you go, take 610 South, exit, 45 South or whatever the case might be, go to Toyota Center. That's a former MVP that's trying to come back to the Houston Rockets. I hope that's not the case, but I've been told that, yeah, it's definitely happened, unfortunately. But check out our guy, Jackson Gatlin, over at Locked On Rockets for that situation. However, the Houston Texans find themselves in another reunion, or potential reunion, I should say. Over the weekend, Mark Berman, one of, if not the best journalists in Houston sports, who's about to retire in the next couple of weeks, I got to add. So shout out to him. I think he told me he's been covering Houston sports for like 42 years, somewhere along those lines.
Longer than I've been alive.
Exactly.
Both of us have been alive.
Exactly. But shout out to Mark Berman, man. But the GOAT never stops working. And I believe it came out on Friday or Saturday. Over the weekend, Mark Berman reported that Jadeveon is hoping for a reunion between himself and the Houston Texans. And some points that I want to give right off the bat. He is currently spending his offseason as right now working out in Houston. He said there's a lot of family he has here in the city, a lot of friends he still have here in the city. His training staff is here in the city. And when asked about the possibility of reuniting with the Houston Texans, by the way, his agent and his organization have had some type of talks throughout the offseason. He said it would be nice. Plus, he's a big fan of Coach DeMeco Ryans, and he loves the addition of Will Anderson Jr. John, does it make sense for the Houston Texans to reunite with Jadeveon Clowney?
Wow, that's a great question. And before I answer that, I do want to mention that in that quote about it would be nice, he also said, my family is here. My friends are here. And I just want to add, man, like whenever people come to Houston, they never fully leave.
They never do.
Like James Harden left, has a restaurant here. So at some point, James Harden's coming back to Houston in terms of before he's a Rocket. Sean Watson was working out here during the entire I'm not going to play. DeAndre Hopkins comes back all the time. Steve Francis.
Deshaun,
that's what I said. Deshaun Watson. Steve Francis was, drafted here in Houston, but never really left. Like you when you talk about Houston sports icons, I don't want to hear a conversation that does not include Steve Francis, that would not include Andre Johnson, J.J. Watt, who I believe will eventually sign a one-day contract to retire as a Houston Texan. The only way to go out, right? But when I look at Jadeveon Clowney, like his team has been in touch with the Houston Texans. There's no deal imminent right now. Clowney just hopes to return. He's still a good run defender, and I think he has more upside as a vet again situationally than a few other guys on the roster, considering how John Grenard has had his share of injuries and miscues in the past couple of seasons, as did Clowney. When I look at a potential return, who has the bigger upside of the two? And if I'm Clowney's people, and if I'm the Houston Texans, right, I'm looking at this situation and I'm saying to myself, if we get Clowney in, at the very least, and I also want to bring back to Jacob Martin, the guy who hasn't played a lot of snaps, but at the very least, we should be able to find ways to delegate snaps to Clowney if he's coming out there and is outperforming John Grenard, if he's outperforming Jacob Martin, who's already on the roster now since he signed the 1-year deal, who is outperforming and could help save snaps for Jerry Hughes down the road if Houston is actually competing for the division. He could come in and you may see an opportunity to play in more snaps early on in the season than a decade plus vet Jerry Hughes, because of his age, who is, I think he turned 36 already. If not, he will before the season starts. So Clowney is a guy that did not end off his tenure in Cleveland the way you would think he would want to, or maybe not what we think he would want to ideally. Right? There was tension and beef there between the head coach and Clowney, between him not wanting to go in outside of playing on third down for Cleveland. And by the way, the year before, his first year in Cleveland, Clowney looked damn good playing alongside Myles Garrett. 9 sacks. A bunch of tackles for loss. So, he's a guy that if he can put it together, stay healthy, and get the opportunities, then who has the bigger upside? Clowney or John Grenard? Clowney or Jacob Martin? Clowney or Damon Harris? Clowney, or I can keep going, Winovich or guys like that. So, you're looking at Will Anderson. He's the guy that he's going to be the cornerstone. Outside of that, does Houston have another cornerstone on that defensive front? I don't think so. And I gave you guys the numbers of how many players was able to contribute on the defensive side of the ball for Houston compared to San Fran playing in less than 50% of the snaps. I think Clowney is a guy that if Houston still wants to use, and I think they will, guys that has to come in and we need for you to give a guy a break, or you're hot right now, so we're going to maybe use you in these situations. Who do I trust more right now? Well, I don't trust Grenard as of right now. I don't really even trust Clowney, but I think that Clowney has the opportunity and the ability to have a bigger impact, and plus looking at him giving Jerry Hughes some time to kind of rest and not have to play so much early on if they're competing for AFC South Championship. And so I think the potential return of Jadeveon Clowney has more impact than the signing of Jacob Martin. I would like to see Clowney in Houston before training camp. I don't want this to be a situation where, it's week 2 or 3, he's still unsigned, and now you're bringing him in because with Nick Caserio, and I know this is a new day, but we've seen that story way too many times. We've seen that movie way too many times. You're signing guys in the season, they got to wait a couple of days, that ramp-up period, and then they don't eventually play. Totally different coaching staff, in a sense, totally different regime, in a sense, but I would rather see him get an opportunity to come in, be a part of this swarm defense in practice, be a part of this swarm defense in training camp. Maybe they do some joint practices. Be a part of it early so that way you're breaking some of those Cleveland Brown bad habits that you went through the last season.
I'm not taking Jadeveon Clowney over John Grenard. I'm sorry. John Grenard is younger. When you talk about upside, I'm still going with John Grenard. He's younger. At this point, at this stage in Jadeveon Clowney's career, I would like to say that John Grenard is more reliable. The only thing is he just can't stay healthy. We talked about this.
But the best availability is to be,
I get all that. I get all that. However, John, I will only want to see Jadeveon Clowney come back if he accepts a lesser role. That was one of the biggest issues that he had during his final year in Cleveland. As a matter of fact, he ended up playing the second lowest snap percentages of his career at 63. That's the lowest he had since his rookie season in 2014 with the Texans at 50. And it made sense because he was a rookie. But I don't want Clowney to come in and think he's going to be one of the primary guys on that defensive front. And you can't. First and foremost, let me just say this. I think the biggest upside of signing Clowney is to give Will Anderson Jr. and a couple of those other young guys a veteran that can just share the knowledge on what it means to not just be an NFL player, but just to be a productive defensive end, a productive defensive lineman. I think
like
there are
because
several.
Clowney made this, the outside linebacker DN switch, standing up and the third
Exactly.
player. So you look at Will Anderson and that correlate. I like that. I'm not mad at that.
And that's what I was going to get at. And not only that, John Grenard made that same switch a couple years ago too. So there are several young guys who are going to have an opportunity to learn. Of course, you could throw Jerry Hughes in this as well, just being another vet that they can go to. But especially when you consider, John, as you just alluded to, the example that you just gave, the fact that you went from standing up to putting your hand in the dirt, he can actually be somebody that can actually help. However, like I just mentioned, I think Clowney would benefit more of being more so situational purposes, other than being a guy that you're going to rely upon on first down, on second down, on third down, whatever the case might be. Everything that we said about Jacob Martin, if you replace Jacob Martin and put Jadeveon Clowney name in there, then I would say, okay, let's go ahead and sign him. Let's sign him to what? A 2-year deal, whatever the case might be. Of course, the money is going to be right because he isn't Jadeveon Clowney like he once was here in the city of Houston about 4 years ago, whatever the case might be. But you have to keep in mind this is a new day, and Jadeveon Clowney, that is part of the reason why he's not in Cleveland right now. Of course, money aspect and money goes into that as well. But he's just not that guy anymore. And if he can accept that, then I say, okay, let's bring him in. But if he comes in thinking, he about to create the Rock Boys 2.0 and Will Anderson about to be the new version of JJY, and we used to love that pairing of him and JJ. I would say no.
I wouldn't even say a 2-year deal. 1-year deal. Come in, same deal. Chase Winovich got same deal. Derek Rivers got same deal. Jacob Martin got. None of you guys has been consistently good enough to give you a multi-year deal. And this is including Jadeveon Clowney has 3 seasons where he has 9 or more sacks. Had 9 sacks 2 seasons ago. But I understand it honestly, and money would play a factor in it.
Well, I was going to say, I only say 2 years because Jerry Hughes is entering the final year of his contract. And I mean, I'm pretty sure this might be the last year for Jerry. So if you sign Clowney to a 2-year deal, that at least give you another veteran for not just this year, but also in 2024 as well.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy how it may just be me, but when I tell you this is a make or break year for John Grenard, this is no disrespect to John Grenard because we've seen him play some very good football. Even last season, he had moments. But it's crazy how I am kind of quick, and I've seen other people kind of quick to take away from the potential of what he can have in terms of how he can contribute to this team, the defensive snaps, how much he's going to be on the field, simply because I just don't know how much we can trust his body. Not his playing ability. And I think I want to apologize. It's not him as a person or a player. It's just trusting his body, him being out on the field. Because when he's able to be out on the field, he's had some bad moments like anybody else in the NFL. But he can be very productive for this team. And so, again, I look at
the coaches he had. He's going to be his fourth DC in 4 years.
No. And this
5 years, however long it's been.
This is why I'm giving Grenard you know what? I can wait. I can see, but if Jadeveon Clowney does come to Houston, I look at Jadeveon signed as a player who can really split those reps with Grenard. We don't have to bank on Grenard playing 60% of the snaps. We could bring it down and have him playing 55, maybe 50, and giving some of those opportunities to Jadeveon, who's been successful in some capacity in the NFL. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers for this Monday show. Hope you guys are having a good time. Hope you guys are sticking around to this point. Last week, the Houston Texans did add to their defensive tackle room, signing third year, who will be going into his fourth year, defensive tackle Byron Cowart, formerly of the New England Patriots, fifth-round pick out of Maryland. And when we look at some of these post-draft signings, even when we look at the, during the draft or the undrafted rookies or whoever in the offseason, Cowart is a guy that, ladies and gentlemen, I look at how I feel about Jacob Martin coming to Houston and Jadeveon Clowney. Who's going to be the third and the fourth string D tackle? And how can that player beat out? How can the new arrival player, in this case, Byron Cowart, beat out the guy in front of him? So immediately I look at Roy Lopez, I look at Kurt Hennish. By the way, Byron hasn't played a full season of football since he played last year for Indy, but wasn't really just effective. No sacks. The year before that in New England in 2020, well, 2 years prior than that in 2020, he had 27 total tackles, 1 sack. He did not play in 2021. Roy Lopez, I think, is the guy that if we look at any of these players in the defensive tackle room, he's the guy with half a body in and majority of the rest of his body outside that door. I like Roy, and I think I like Roy because he's a good representation of the city of Houston, the Hispanic community, getting a guy out here that, they can go out and buy the jersey with, and he represents the Hispanic culture. There's no way we can talk about the city of Houston and not mention the impact culturally of the Hispanic community. But as a football player, he's a player that I don't think ever really had an opportunity to get developed correctly. Like we talk about John Gennard, we talk about a lot of these guys prior to last season. How many of those players just had to go through a couple of seasons of the ups and downs of bad fortune? Like coaching staff is in, coaching staff is out. Oh, we got another one in, or we got another one out. And you hate that. You hate that because now this is the perfect situation for him. But how many of these players will get the opportunity to be in the building, be around the coaching staff, and have the opportunity to get developed? I think Roy Lopez is one of those players that's looking outside the door and saying, well, you know what? Kind of like Ross Blacklock, my time may be coming. Now, I want to see him do good. I'm not giving Byron Cowart the position over him by no means, but third and fourth string guys, how are you going to beat out the new signing? How are you going to beat out Lopez? How are you going to beat out Hennish? How are you going to beat out Taylor Stallworth? Those are the three players that I'm looking at, and I'm saying to myself, when camp does come around, those four all together will be bunched together, and they will be the competition within each other.
I think this is probably just a training camp signing, if I'm being 100%
probably so too.
Honest. John, I know you mentioned Roy Lopez. I think Roy Lopez is in arguably the best position of his career because he's going to be playing potentially for the best coaching staff he has ever played for since he got drafted in 2021.
Potentially?
Well, I say potentially only because we still don't know. Everything that we've been saying has just been, we got to see how things look as of right now. I'm pretty sure he's going to be one of the guys that we're going to see at OTAs starting on Tuesday. I like Roy Lopez. I don't think that his job is in question. I do believe that this is a make or break year for him.
Thank you guys for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Texan podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texan and like us on Facebook. But as always, make sure you take those same 2 thumbs, scroll over to YouTube, type in Locked On Texan podcast, hit subscribe, then like, then comment.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Really quick, listeners, let us know, who would you prefer back in the city of Houston? James Harden or Jadeveon Clowney? John, would you like to weigh in? Harden, Clowney.
I would rather take Jadeveon Clowney.
And I agree because apparently Harden wants 200 and something million over the next 4 years. Once again, go check out Jackson Gatlin, our colleague over at Locked On Rockets. We're not about to get into that, but yeah, I would take Jadeveon Clowney as well, unless James Harden decides to take a step back, be a mentor, which I don't think he will be a good mentor. But just take a step back and realize you are not James Harden, just like you are not Jadeveon Clowney that you was about 5 years ago. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.